All right, guys, how's it going? So today we're going to be talking about lunar eclipses. So, we've been talking about phases of the moon. Now we're going to talk about a lunar eclipse, which is just essentially when the moon is on the opposite side of the Earth and the sun, and it's in the shadow of the Earth to the point to where um, it is not being hit by direct sunlight. So we're going to answer a couple of these really common questions. The first one being, how does the lunar eclipse occur? The second one being, how often does a lunar eclipse occur? Then why is that moon red during a lunar eclipse? And then when is the next lunar eclipse? When's the next time we can see this? Does this happen often? Is this something we can see relatively soon? And we will answer all those questions. We will come back to this link because that's how we'll wrap this up. So again, a lunar eclipse occurs whenever the moon is in that space behind the Earth to where the sun is not hitting it with direct light. And you would think that this happens fairly rarely, but there's some underlying reasons why it doesn't. And we'll go over those today. But all you need to know is there's 3 different types of lunar eclipses. There's the penumbral lunar eclipse, partial lunar eclipse, and then a total lunar eclipse. And they all have frequent percentages on how often they occur. They're all roughly a third of the time. But the only ones that are really visible to us is a total lunar eclipse. And we'll talk about some of the lunar eclipse geometry and why these lunar eclipses occur. This first one, the penumbral lunar eclipse, occurs when the moon is in this space, not directly behind the Earth, but actually at an angle above it. So some direct sunlight is hitting it, but not a lot of it. So it's in these right triangles that exist outside of the direct shadow behind the Earth. So any of the penumbras, right here and right here, they exist above and below that space that the Earth has a total shadow. The next type of lunar eclipse is a partial lunar eclipse. This is when only a portion of the moon is within the penumbra or umbra. So anytime it's within those different segments, if it's like split in half or whatever, basically a portion of the moon is going to look really dark, and that's because that is the part that's getting hit by the Earth's shadow. But then the rest of it will be illuminated. As you recall, whenever the moon is behind the Earth, it's typically a full moon because there's direct sunlight from the moon, from the sun to the moon. So unless it's within these specific zones behind the Earth, unless it's really hiding behind the Earth, it's typically a full moon. But sometimes when it is behind the Earth at the right particular time, in the right angle, we get this specific space where the moon is basically casted a shadow upon. And you don't have a full moon. You'll have either a penumbral lunar eclipse, partial lunar eclipse, or in some rare cases, a total lunar eclipse. And that's when it's so directly behind the Earth that no direct sunlight is being casted upon the moon. And we'll look at that right now. So if it's in this, Goldilocks zone, not within the penumbra, but 100% in the umbra, then what you're going to end up getting is a total lunar eclipse. And the reason why this occurs so rarely is because the moon's orbit around the Earth is actually tipped at a 5-degree angle to the Earth's orbit around the sun. So a lot of times, typically, the sunlight gets passed over or under the Earth onto the moon, and that's why we have full moons, almost every month. 99% of the time we get full moons. However, we do get these other events, different types of lunar eclipses, because sometimes the angles just line up at the right space, and that 5-degree angle to Earth's orbit isn't exactly existing up within the moment. But most of the time, the moon spends its time either above or below the Earth's orbital plane around the sun. But the lunar eclipse also only occurs during that full moon stage, which is only a certain number of days out of the month, right? It's only during that fifth phase of the moon's phase cycle. Who can see the lunar eclipse? Basically, because we know it's whenever the moon is on the opposite side of the Earth and the sun, it's only during nighttime that whoever is on that side of the planet that is in the specific zone to see the lunar eclipse will see the lunar eclipse. So it's if you're on the night side of the Earth during the lunar eclipse, you can see the lunar eclipse. For our next eclipse that's coming up, I'm answering one of those questions, May 26, 2021. Sorry if you're watching this later. The current date is April 8th, 2021. So May 26, 2021, a lot of Asia, Australia, and the Americas will be able to see the next total lunar eclipse. The next lunar eclipse event is a total lunar eclipse on May 26, 2021. Those penumbral and partial lunar eclipses, they're really rare to see. They're difficult to detect. And most of the time you can't see them with the naked eye. So the only ones that we really ever see is the total lunar eclipse. Sometimes we'll see the other ones, but typically that 30 to 35% of the lunar eclipses are the total lunar eclipses, and those are the ones that you typically see pictures of or you see posted up on the internet, or they announce in the news, because they know that those are the ones that typically people can see with the naked eye. Now, why is the moon red during a lunar eclipse? I get this question a lot. If you think back to our last unit, waves, we talked about refraction and the filtration of light, right? So a lunar eclipse occurs whenever direct sunlight is blocked from hitting the moon. But that doesn't mean that some sunlight does not get through indirect means. So when a lunar eclipse occurs, the sunlight still is able to actually travel through the Earth's atmosphere and reach the moon. So that's why it's not a complete shadow. The reason why it's not a complete shadow is that that light does make it through. But what ends up happening is a lot of the blue colored light is actually filtered through the refraction process through the Earth's atmosphere. And by the time the indirect light reaches the moon, the only light that exists is the infrared and red visible light. So that is the light that's illuminating the moon. And that's why the moon appears to be red to us. So that's all I got for you guys. The next lunar eclipse is going to occur May 26, 2021. I'm going to try and write it down and remember it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. These things happen maybe once a year or less than that. So try and catch it. It's an interesting sight to see, and it's rarer than you believe. If you look up there and you see full moon every month, you just think, this has to occur fairly often, but it really doesn't. So check it out. There's plenty of pictures on the internet. That red moon's something to see. So it's not just a lunar eclipse, but it's a total lunar eclipse. So it's a good sight to see. So check it out, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.